Hi there, and with this lecture, we start a new section in which we will discuss Python lists. List in a Python is a built-in data structure, which means that it comes with the standard Python library. There are other built-in data structures in Python, such as tuple, dictionary, and set. Here, in this course, we will look at lists, dictionaries, and tuples. So let's start with lists. A list is a data structure that holds an ordered collection of items. Example, you can store a sequence of items in a list. Here, ordered means that the way that you declare a list, it stays as it is. The place of elements is not changing. It's easy to imagine a list if you think of a shopping list where you have a list of items to buy, except that you have each item on a separate line in your shopping list. Whereas in Python list, you put commas between your items. It's expressing like this. The list of items should be enclosed in square brackets so that Python understands that you are specifying a list. The values in list called elements or items. There are several ways of creating new list. The simplest way to enclose the elements in square brackets. For example, here we are creating the list of integers. We are just enclosing these integers inside square brackets. Here we are creating list of string elements. Here again, we are just enclosing the strings with the square brackets. The main difference between array and list is that here the elements of list don't have to be the same type, which means that we can create a list like this. Here we have a string value, here we have an integer value, and here we have float value. We can mix up these different values and create one list over here. Even if we go in advanced level, we can create a list inside another list, which means that if you see the elements of the list here, the first element is string, and the second element is float, and the third element is integer, and the fourth element here is another list. When we count the elements of list inside this list, it will be 4. Nested list is taken account as one element. So if you have a list inside another list, this is called nested list. Let's see how this is working in practice. So here in Visual Studio Code, let's see how creating list works in Python. So first of all, let's create a list of integers. I will put like this, integers. Inside square brackets, we will put 1, 2, 3, 4. So if I press enter, it's created. So I can print out the value of these integers. As you see, it's printed the values. So our list is successfully created. Let's create another list with string values. String list is equal to, once again, we will put square brackets over here. Let's add some strings here, milk, cheese, and I'll put butter. This is our shopping list. So we create it here. If I press enter, it will be created. So I can print the value of this list over here. We can see that it's successfully created. So our list is successfully created. Let's try another list with mixed values. So here, mixed list I will create. I'll put values. For example, first value will be integer, then I'll put float, then let's put another string value, spam, and let's say one more time, print this out, list. You see that the list is successfully created. Let's try another example where we will create a list inside another list. So which will be nested list. So in here we will create nested list equals, one more time again, square brackets, we are putting 1, 2, 3, 4. Then here I'll put 1.5, 1.5, 1.6. Let me create another list inside this list with string values. Let's put test. It will have only one value. If I click the enter, it will be created automatically. So I can print out the values of these nested lists over here. So you see that this list also is created. So that's how we are creating a list in Python. If you want to create an empty list, we just need to put something like this. And we can print out this empty list, empty. You see that there is no element inside our list. So the creation of list is like this in the Python. So hopefully everything is clear now. Now in the next lectures, let's see some other operations that we can perform on lists. Hi there. Now in this lecture, we will look at how can we access elements of the list and traverse through list. As I said before, I'm not going to show you what's happening when we access or traverse through loop in the memory. Because I showed you this in array section, the logic behind the list and array is same. If you want to get more detail, I recommend you to go back and review the array section. So the syntax for accessing the elements of list is the same as for accessing the elements of an array. Once again, here we will use bracket operator. The expression inside bracket will be index again. So let's one more time create our shopping list. Shopping list. I'll put here milk, cheese, and butter. Okay, if you want to access an element of list here, we will use a bracket operator with index. As you remember, in array, the index starts from the 0. Here is the same, the index starts from the 0. So this will be 0 index, this will be 1, and this will be 2. So if I want to access the first element in the list, I will write something like this. Print shopping list with 0. So this way we can access the first element in this list. So let's run our code. Python 3 list operations. So you see that our element is printed over here. If you want to access this second element, we will just need to put one here and save the file and run it. We will see that the cheese is here. Our second element is cheese. You can think of a list as a relationship between indexes and elements. This relationship is called mapping. Each index maps to the one of the elements. List indexes work the same as array indexes. Any integer expression can be used as index. For example, if you try to read or write an element that does not exist, you'll get an error. So let's try. We know that we have 3 elements here, which means that our maximum index is 2. Let's try to access with index 3. Let's see what will happen. Let me just clear here and run our code. You see that it shows that list index is out of range, which means that we are providing bigger index to access the elements, and this element does not exist in our list. For accessing elements, we have another way, but in this way we are not accessing the element. We are checking that if this element exists in the list or not. There is an in operator for this. By using in operator, we can find out if an element exists in this list or not. So this is working like this. Print, for example, milk in shopping list. If this is returning true, it means that this exists here. If it returns false, it means that milk does not exist here. Let's run it. You see that our expression returned true, which means that we have milk here. Okay, if I write a different thing here, we will see that it returns false. So if I write bread here, so save and run it, you see that it returns false, which means that bread does not exist inside this list. So in operator is also useful for accessing elements, but in this case, it's just returning Boolean value, true or false. So you might be interested, what if we provide as index minus value? What will happen in this case? So in this case, we are accessing the elements from the backward. So for example, if I just copy it from here and run it for -1 value, as index I will put -1. You will see that in this case it will return butter. Minus value starts from here. So if I put, for example, -2, you see that it returns cheese. So what will happen if I put -4 over here? Let's try it. You see that one more time we are receiving list index out of range. So our index starts from 0, 1, 2. But when we come reversely, when we come from backward, then it does not start from 0. It starts from -1, -2, and -3. When we reach -4, it means that it's out of index. So that's how the accessing of elements of list is working. So let's see how can we traverse through this list. The most common way to traverse the elements of a list is with loop. So the syntax will be like this. If I just write any loop here, loop I in shopping list, I can print I. This will visit each element of the list and print out the values. So in the first case, it will print milk, then cheese, then butter. Let's run our code, we will see the result. So as you see, this loop traverses all elements of the list. So first it goes to milk, then it goes to cheese, then it goes to butter. So it's traversing through all elements of the list. So this is the common way of doing this, but we have another ways to traverse through the list elements. In this case, we are just printing it. So what if we have an integer list and we want to do some operations, mathematical operations on this list? We cannot use this formula. In this case, we need to just traverse through the list using indexes. In this case, I will use again loop, but with range and length function. Here I will use for I in range. Then I need to take length of list. I'll put shopping list. Then I can update, for example, the values to some standard value. Let's just do something like this. Let me take shopping list I equals. Let's put plus sign at the end of these strings, which means that we have done our shopping. So we have bought everything inside this shopping list. So I'll put like this. Then it's going to be shopping list plus. So if I save this and run this, because I haven't printed out this value, because that's why it's not showing anything. If I print out this, you will see the values. As you see, for each element of the list, we have put here a plus sign, which means that we have bought everything. So in this way, we can do some update operations on the elements of the list. So you might be interested, what's the range and length function over here? The length function is returning the value of number of items in a container. So here we have a number of 3 elements. So here we will return 3. But you might be now interested, if we put 3 here, it should return out of index error. In this case, range function saves us, because range function works from 0 to n-1, which means that if we put here 3, it will go till 2. So in our first case, it's coming shopping list with 0. Then in the second run, it comes shopping list with 1. Then in the third run, it comes shopping list with 2. It never reached to do element 3 because the functionality of range function works like this. So you might be interested if we have empty list. Can we traverse through empty list? We can write a loop through empty list, but this code will never happen. So for example, if I create here an empty list like this, and if I try to traverse through it for I in empty, for example, print that I am empty. So if I run this code, here I forget to put I, this code will never print out. So to make our thing easier, I'll just comment this part and run our code. You see that we don't have anything returned, which means that when you traverse through an empty list, it's not executed. So because we don't have any element inside this list. So this is all for accessing elements of the list and traversing through the list. And hopefully you understand how we are traversing and accessing the elements of the list. See you in the next lecture. Hi there. Now in the last video, we have learned how can we access element of the list and how can we traverse through list. Now in this video, we will look at how inserting and updating elements work in Python list. Lists are mutable data structures. That's why you can change the order of elements in a list or reassign an item in a list. When the bracket operator appears on the left side of an assignment, it identifies the elements of the list that will be assigned. Let's say we have a list of integers like this. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Now if we print out this list, we will see that the order of elements appear as we declare them. You see that the printout in the console is same as the way that we declared the elements. So this is because lists are ordered collections, meaning that the order of elements will be the same order as we declared them till we change the order. So now we know that lists are ordered collections and they are mutable. So we can update the elements of any list over here. To update the element in the list, we need to access the element and then assign a value to it. As we said, we will use bracket operator over here as well. So here, for example, if I want to update third element in the list, we know that the index starts from the 0, so the third element's index will be 2. So I'll put here 2, should be 2, and let's update to this 33. And let me print out the list one more time. Okay, let's run our code. You see that this is our initial list, the way that we declared, and this is the updated list. The third element over here is updated with 32. So to update an element in a list, we just need to access the element inside the list over here, then assign a value to the element. So here we are using bracket operator one more time. So if you try, for example, another example, my list, for example, if we try to update fourth element, this is fifth element actually, the index is 4 to 55, and run our code, we see that here the third element is updated to 33 and fifth element, which is the index 4, updated 55. Here you see that previously our list was like this, now the new list is like this, so the elements get updated. So you might be interested, what is the time and space complexity for this operation? So the time complexity for this operation is O1, because we know that accessing an element of a list is O1 time complexity. This is the most beneficial part of lists, because lists provides us very efficient way of accessing elements by using their index and index identifier their locations in the memory. So the time complexity for updating list element is O1, because as we said, accessing is very efficient and we are just assigning a value over here. So this is O1 time complexity, and the space complexity for updating an element in the list is O1 also, because here we don't need any extra memory. We have already reserved the memory for a given element. We are just changing the value of it. This means that an extra memory is not required. So now let's see how insertion works in the list. So let me delete everything from here. We will see how insertion works now. So there are 4 ways of inserting a value to the list. We can insert an element to the beginning of list over here. We can insert an element any given location. For example, if you want to insert here, we can insert. And we can insert an element at the end of list. And the other way is we can have another list and we can take all elements of this list and append at the end of this list. So performing these operations over here, we will use list methods. So these are insert method, append method, and extend method. So let's see one by one how these methods are working. The insert method inserts an element in any given location to the list. We can use insert method to insert an element at the beginning of list or any given location in the list. Let's see how this is working. Okay, first let's print out this list, my list. Then I will use insert function, my list dot insert. If you want to insert an element at the beginning of the list, we will use index 0, because the first element in insert method is index, and then second element is the value that we want to insert. For example, if I put 11 here, and one more time let's print out the list to see the value and save it. Let's run it. You see that new element is added in the beginning of the list. So before our list was like this, now our list is like this. So the first element in the list is now 11. So if you notice that when we add an element in the beginning of list, all elements have to move one step right. So before 1 was in the 0 index, now 1 is in the first index. So each element has to move one step right. So as you see like this. And this is very time consuming operation, because imagine that if you have millions of elements in the list, so this will take too much time to move each element one step right. So we can use insert method to insert an element in any given location. For example, if you want to insert an element over here, we will use index 4. For example, let's add 15 and let's run our code. You see that in the place of 5, we have added 15. But the 5 is moved one step right, and the 6 also moved one step right, and 7 also moved one step right. And this causes the performance problem in the application. Now let's continue with the other method, which is append method. So with the append method, we can only add an element at the end of list. So this works like this. We are writing the name of list and dot append. We can write any element that we want. For example, 55. Let me just take print from here and put it here, and let me comment out this line over here and run our code. You see that 55 is added at the end of list. By using append method, we can add an element at the end of list. So this is very efficient way of adding element, because in this case we don't have to move any element right or left. That's why it's just straight away added the elements over here. The third method that we can add an element to the list is extend method. By using extend method, we can add another list to our list. For example, if I create over here new list, which will have some new values, let's put 11, 12, 13, 14. So by using extend method, I can add this list to my list. So extend new list, save, let's run our code. So you see that all elements in the new list is added at the end of this my list. So before the list was like this, now all elements from the new list is added here. So what is the time and space complexity for these methods? So as we said, when we add an element using insert method, we have to move all elements one step right. So this means that the time complexity will be O(n) for this method over here, because every time after adding, we have to move each element one step right. Then we continue to append method. We said that when we use append method, we are just adding an element at the end of list. So this means that this is very efficient. We are not moving any elements right. So the time complexity for this method over here, append, will be O(1) time complexity. And the space complexity is O(1) because we just need one location for each element. Then we are continuing to extend method. With extend method, the time complexity depends on the elements of the list. This means that if we have n number of elements over here in the new list, so the time complexity for extending to a new list will be O(n) time complexity, because the way that it works is just looping through all elements of the new list and adding them one by one at the end of the list that we want to add. So as you see here, we declared our list in this way and it added elements the same ordered way. So here the first element is 11, and you see that after addition, the first element over here is 11, then 12, 13, 14, which means that it adds the element in an ordered way that we declared. And the space complexity for this one is also O(n) because it depends on the number of the elements, how many elements that we are going to add here. If we add n number of elements, so we need to allocate n number of elements, so the space complexity will be O(n) by using extend method. So this is all for this lecture. Hopefully everything is clear about updating and inserting new elements to the list. Now in the next lecture, let's see how can we delete an element from the list. Hi there. Now in the last video we have learned how can we insert an element in the list and how can we update an element of the list. Now in this lecture we will look at how deletion in list works. Before deleting an element from the list, let's see how slicing works in the list, because we will need this functionality for deleting multiple elements from the list. For slicing, we use slice operator. So let's see how this is working in Python. Imagine that we have a list like this. So if we want to select first two elements of the list, we can do it using slice operator. So let's print out first two elements of this list. So we can use it my list. Slicing is used with bracket operators. So here we are putting 0 and 2. So by doing this, we will print out first two elements of this list. If I run our code, you see that the first two elements of this list A and B is printed out. So as you notice that first index here is included in our output, but the second index here is not included. So the functionality of slice is working like this. It's excluding the second index. The second index is not included in our output. So if I omit first index, it will start from the beginning and print out till the index that is before this second index. So if I remove 0 from here and omit it and run our function one more time, you see that the result is not changed. So if you are going to start from the first element, you don't need to provide it. What if I omit the second element? If I just put here 1 and omit the second element, let's see what will happen. In this case, list starts from the first index that we provide here and continues until the last element. So omitting second index here will bring us all elements from the list. So if we omit both elements from here, let's see what will happen. If I run our function, you see that it's printing all elements from the list. So omitting both elements will print all elements from the list. By using slice operator, we can update multiple elements in the list. For example, if we want to update first two elements of this list, we can do like this. My list. So for first two elements, we will start from 0, go to the second index, and second index is not included. We can put here, for example, instead of A, B, we can put X, Y. and let's run our function. You see that after updating multiple elements, the first two elements is changed to x and y. So by using slice, we can update multiple elements in our list. So let's see how deletion is working in the list. So there are several ways of deleting elements from a list. We can use pop method, delete method, and remove method to delete an element from the list. Let's start from the first one with pop method. To delete an element from the list by using a pop method, we need to provide an index of element to pop method. Pop method takes as a parameter index of the element that we want to delete. So here, if I put like this and call pop method, for example, if I put 1 here and print out our list, you will see that our second element will be deleted because the index 1 refers to the second element. If I just run our code, you see that second element is deleted. As we delete the second element, all elements on the right side of this element, deleted elements, moved one step left. So C moved to the place of D and D moved to the place of C and continues like this. And this is very time consuming operation. So if we don't provide any index over here, the pop method will delete the last element in the list. So if you run this, you see that F is deleted, the last element is deleted. The pop method is very useful when we want to keep our deleted elements, because this function returns the deleted element by itself. So if I just print out the operation over here, you will see that it will print out deleted item. So we are calling pop method without any index, which means that it will delete the last element. So as you see, if I print out the output from here, it prints out F, which means that it deletes F. So if I just put here 2, which is the index of C, and run our code, you see that it will print out C, and C is deleted from the list. Let's continue to the next method, delete method. If we don't need removed value, we can use delete method. Delete method also works based on index. Okay, let's see how delete method is working. As I said, it's working based on index as well. So here we need to call delete my list. For example, if I want to delete first element, I'll save it. For now, I'll just comment this part and run our function. You see that B is deleted. So in this case, index 1 is the index of B, so B is deleted. So here, if I delete, for example, the third element, you'll see that 0, 1, 2, 3, D element will be deleted. So D is deleted. So this is how the deletion method is working. In this case, this function, delete function, is not returning anything. By using delete method, we can delete more than one element using slicing. For example, if you want to delete first two elements of this list, I can just put here 0 to 2 and run our code. You see that A and B is deleted. If I just change it to 2 to 3, let's put 4 here, it will delete starting from the second index till 3 index. Second and third index will be deleted. So here the index of 2 shows the third element, so which means that third and fourth element will be deleted, and C and D is deleted, as you see from the output over here. Let's continue to the last method, which is remove method. The remove method is very useful when you know the element itself. You don't need to know the index. You can just provide the value and delete that value. Let me just comment out this part also. So call remove function, mylist.remove. Here, for example, if I want to delete element E, if I save it and run it, you see that element E is deleted. So this is how remove method is working, and it's very useful when you want to delete element itself without knowing any index. So let's see what is the time and space complexity for this function. To remove element by using pop function, if we just use it without any parameter, it will delete the last element, and this means that the time complexity will be O1, because deleting last element is not causing any shift in our list. So the time complexity for deleting last element using pop function is O1. But if we use pop function to delete an element from the beginning of the list, then the time complexity will be On, because if I delete the first element, the rest elements have to move one step left. So this means that it will take too much time if we have more values. The space complexity for all these methods will be O1, because there is no requirement for extra memory to perform any deletion. So let's continue to delete method. Delete method also takes On time complexity, because here when we delete any specified element or multiple elements, the rest elements have to move one step or more steps to the left. So this means that the time complexity will be On. Now it comes to the remove method. The remove method also takes O(n) time complexity, because here we are providing the element straight away, which means that if we provide first element, all elements have to move one step left. So the time complexity will be O(n). As I mentioned, space complexity for all these methods is O1. So this is it for deleting elements from the list. Hopefully everything is clear now. Hi there. In this video, we will look at another operation that we can perform on a given list. Here, we will search for a given value in the list. This means that we will check if a given value exists in the list or not. Let's say we have a list like this, and we want to look if a value of 20 exists in the list or not. So, how can we find out that if the value exists in the list or not? Here, in this lecture, we will look at two options. First option is by using in operator, which is built-in functionality of Python. The second method is using searching algorithms. Now, in this course, we will learn type of searching algorithms, but here, I will show you the simplest one, which is linear search, which means that we are visiting each element of the list and checking that if this is the element that we are looking for or not. So let's see how this is working in practice. Okay, the first method is by using in operator. In operator works like this. For example, I can write if condition if 20 in my list. Then I can print out the index of this 20, my list. By using index functionality of list, we can find the index of any given value. So here, if I put 20, if this exists here, it will show what is the index of 20. Otherwise, we can print out that the value does not exist in the list. So I'll print out like this. The value does not exist in the list. So let's run our code. Let's save it, then run it. You see that it returns 1. The index of 20 is 1. Let's check from the list. This is the 0 index and this is index 1. So the values exist here. For example, if I write 100 over here and save it and run our file, so you see that the value does not exist in the list, which means that 100 does not exist in the list that we created over here. So you might be interested, what is the time and space complexity for this? The time complexity will be O(n) because in operator works the way checking all elements one by one and returning the value. So by checking all elements one by one, it will take O(n) time complexity. So let's look at the second method. The second method is linear search. So for linear search, I will create a function over here. Let me delete this code from here. We can create one function, for example, search in list. And this function will take two parameters. First parameter will be the list, and the second parameter will be the value that we are looking for. Then we will create a loop for I in list. If I equals the value that we are looking for, then we will print the index of this, return list.index of this value. Otherwise, we return value does not exist in the list. So let's save it and run it for example, one more time for 20. Search in list. As a list, we will take my list and the value will be 20. And let's print out the output from here. So if we print out output, let's save this and let's clear this. Okay, let's run our code. You see that it returns 1. So which means that the index of 20 is 1. If I put, for example, 50 over here and run our code, you see that it returns 4. So which means that the index of 50 in this list is 4. So let's see, this is 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. So which means that our function is working properly. So if I write, for example, 100 over here and check it, you see that the value does not exist in the list. So what is the time and space complexity for this function? The time complexity will be O(n) time complexity, because if we start from here, we see that returning a value from the list is O1 time complexity, and if condition over here is also O1 time complexity. So the time complexity for the loop over here is O(n) time complexity, because here we are visiting each element of list over here. So this means that this will take O(n) time complexity. So if we combine all time complexities over here, we see that the time complexity for this function will be O(n) time complexity. And the space complexity is O1, because here we don't need any extra memory to execute this function. So in this video, we have learned how to search an element in the list. So we did it in two ways, by using in operator and linear searching algorithm. So hopefully everything is clear now. Hi there. In this lecture, we will look at list operations and list functions. So let's start with list operations. The first operation is plus operator, which concatenates the list. So let's see how this is working. Imagine that we have two lists. The first one is A. Let's see. It consists of 3 elements. And the second one is B. B also consists of 3 elements. I'll put like this. 4, 5, 6. So by using plus operator, we can concatenate these two lists and create one another list, or just print out list out. In this case, I will just create another list, C, which will be concatenation of these two lists. So if we print out C, and save and run our code, you see that the list of C is now consists of both elements from the A and B. It's concatenation of A and B. So by using plus operator, we can concatenate two lists together. It doesn't matter how many elements we have here. If we put, for example, another element over here and save and run it, you see that 7 is also included over here. So this is how plus operator works. So let's continue to the next operator. The next operator is star operator. So by using star operator, any elements in the list can be repetitive. It means that, for example, if I have a list like this, for example, with the element of 0, if I use star operator and multiply this with 4, you will see that we will have this element 4 times repetitive in the same array. So I can put like this, A equals A star by 4. So let's run our code. Let me print out A. So let's save and run our code. You see that 4 is repetitive 4 times. So if I add another element over here, this time these two elements will be 4 times repetitive. Let's run our code. You see that now 0, 1, 4 times repetitive, which means that by using star operator over here, so we can make our elements in the list to be repetitive. So these are two operations that we need to know about list operation. So let's continue to do list functions. There are a number of built-in functions in Python that can be used on lists that allow you quickly look through a list without writing your own loops. The first function that we are going to use, length function. So instead of writing a loop and counting elements of a list, we can use length method to count the elements of the list. So imagine that we have a list like this. Let me delete code from here. Let me put a few more elements over here. Imagine that we have a list like this. So if we want to count element of this list, we can use length function. Len, and then inside we will put list name. Let's run our code. You see that number of elements is 7. So which means that we have 6 elements over here plus this 0 is 7. This helps us to write efficient code, because normally when we count a number of elements in the list, we have to loop through list and count them one by one. But in this case, we don't need to use loop. We are just using length function, and by using length function, we can get the number of elements in the list. So the next function is max function. So by using max method, we can find the maximum element in the list. Once again, this is helping us to eliminate loop, because instead of writing loop to compare elements one by one, we can just write max method to find maximum element in this list. For example, if I just use it over here, max A, you'll see that the number it will return is 6. So let's run our code. You see that maximum number over here is 6. So the next method is min method. So by using min method, we can find the minimum number in the list. It's working same way as the max method, but here it returns minimum number in the list. So if we select like this and save it, run our code, you see that the output is 0, which means that the minimum number in our list is 0. So this is how minimum method works. So the next method is sum function. So by using sum method, we can find the sum of these elements in the list. This is also very efficient. Instead of again writing loop, we are just summing up the elements. The syntax is same. We are just calling sum function with the parameter of A. So if we run our function, you see that it returns 21. So if we sum these elements over here, we will get 21. These functions are very useful when developing a software. By using combination of these functions, we can easily calculate other functions as well. For example, if we want to calculate average of this list, we don't have such function, but by using the functions that I explained here, we can find the average. So we know that the average is the sum of elements divided by the number of elements. So we can find sum of elements with sum A, and divided by number of elements. So how can we find the number of elements here? So we learned that by using len function we can find the count of elements in the list. So if I put like this and save and run our code, you will see that the output is 3, which means that we have 7 elements over here and the sum of these elements are 21. So 21 divided by 7, it is 3. So by using combination of these functions we can find other functions as well, which are very useful in this. So here I prepared a challenge for you. By using these functions, we will do a challenge. So let's imagine that we have a code block like this, in which we are taking the numbers from the user and finding the average of this number. So if we run our code, you see that it asks to enter a number. So if I enter 1 and press enter, again it asks another number. So if I enter 2 and press enter, again it asks another number. To end this series, we just need to put done. When we put done, it will automatically give us the average of these numbers. So if I put here done, you see that the average is 1.5, which means that 1 plus 2 divided by 2 is 1.5. So this is how our block of code is working. As you see here, I declared 2 variables which initiated 0. Then inside while loop, here we are asking for user to enter a number. If a user enters done, then it exits from the loop. Otherwise, it continues to convert the number that user entered to float. And in total variable, we are keeping these values. Every time we receive a value, we are adding to the total. And in each loop, we are counting the number of loops. So at the end, we are calculating the average of these numbers. So now here, I want you to convert this block of code over here by using list and list functions. So which will make our code more efficient. So now here, I want you to pause the video and think if you can convert this block of code to the code that will use list and list functions. So pause the video now. Okay, now see how can we convert this block of code to the code that will use list. So here, I will create a new list, and instead of using these variables over here, I will use the list to keep the values that the user enters. I will delete this variable over here. Instead of these variables, I will create new list. So here, I will create my list like this, which is creating empty list. So then we start looping. While it's true, we will loop. This part will remain same because user has to enter numbers, and when he or she enters down, it should break. And this part also will remain same. We need to convert this to the float. So here, instead of keeping the values in the total variable, I will use mylist and append. Then I will add the value that user enters. So which means that every time a user enters a value, this will append our list. So I don't need these two parts over here. So at the end, we need to calculate average of this list. So how can we calculate average of list? So let me put this average variable outside loop. So here we will take sum of my list, and here length of list, which will give us number of elements in the list. So length of my list. So if I run our code now, you see that it asks to enter a number. I will enter 1, 2, 3, then done. You see that the average is 2. So if we sum up these elements over here, we are getting 6, and 6 divided by 3 is 2. So you see that here we used list and list functions to convert the block of code that we wrote before to the function that use list and list functions. So this makes our life much more easier. So now hopefully everything is clear about list operations and list functions. So by using these functions, you can write more efficient programs. So that's all for this lecture. See you in the next lecture. Hi there. Now in this video, we will look at how can we create a list from string. So we know that a string is a sequence of characters and a list is a sequence of values. But a list of characters is not same as a string. So to convert a string to a list character, we can use list function. So let's imagine that we have a string like this. A string, for example, like this, spam. If we want to convert this string to the list, we need to use list function. So here I'll create b as list function. Inside here we will call a. So if I print out b, you'll see that the list is created. So you see that every character here converted to the element in the list. So we can access this first character by using index 0 and this p index 1, and it continues like this. The name of list is built-in function in Python. It's advisable that not to use list as a variable name, so you cannot mix them. But there might be situations you want to break a string into words. Then you can use split method. So let's say that we have 3 spam over here, and we want to create a list from this string, but every element we want as a word. So for this case, we are using split function. The split function is working like this. So here I will call a.split. Then you will see that this is creating a list of B with the elements spam, spam, spam. Let's run our code. You see that from this string, we created a list which consists of 3 elements of spam. So if you want to access second spam over here, we can use list index of 1 and access to this element over here. As you see, here the delimiter is space, between these words. For example, if you have a string like this, I'll put like this, spam 1, spam 2. How can we convert this string to this? Because in this case, we don't have any space between elements. In this case, we can use an optional argument called delimiter. So which specifies which character to use as a word boundaries. So for this example, we can use, for example, dash as a delimiter. So we need to do like this. Before creating list, we can create any variable delimiter like this and assign it to dash. So in this case, when we create a list, we will call delimiter parameter inside split function. So if I run this, you see that by using delimiter parameter over here, we are able to convert this string to the list. So we can use any character that we want over here to convert the string to the list. For example, if you see that we have a repetitive here, if I put a here and run our function, you see that the string is converted to the list based on delimiter a. So that's how the split function is working to convert a string to the list. Okay. There's another function which is converting list to string. So by using join function, we can revert back these elements to a string. So to use join function, we will call delimiter dot join. So here as a parameter, I will put the list that we want to join. So you see that after calling join function, we created a string based on the elements from this list, and we have provided as a delimiter a. So that's why this string comes back to the way that we had before. So these are the functions that are useful for converting string to list and list to the strings. So this is all for this lecture. So in this lecture, we have learned how can we convert the strings to the list and list to the strings. Hopefully, you have understand the functions over here. Hi there. In this video, we will look at drawbacks of lists. This means that careless use of lists can lead to long hours of debugging. Here are some common pitfalls and ways to avoid them. The first one is we don't need to forget that most list methods modify the argument and return none. This is the opposite of string methods, which returns a new string and leave the original alone. So let's imagine we have a list like this. So if we use the sort function for this list like this, mylist assigned to mylist.sort, and let's print out our list. You see that the return is none. My list is now none. This means that many operator or methods in Python modifying the list and returning none value. So we cannot use these return values for the next operations. The best way to avoid such misunderstanding is to read the documentation carefully and test them in interactive mode. The best place to check is docs.python.org. So let's look at the second problem. The second problem with list is that there are many two ways to do things. For example, to remove an element from a list, you can use pop method, remove method, or delete method. Or even a slice assignment can be used to remove elements. So these many ways of doing things might lead some misunderstanding. This means that, for example, if we want to append this list over here, we can call append function and, for example, add 10 here. So if I print our list and let's run our code, you see that the element is added at the end of list. So another way of adding an element to the list, we can use concatenate operator. Here the operator works like this. My list equals my list plus element 10. Let me just comment out this part, save. And if I run our code, you will see that the element is added at the end of list. So this is fine. But because of these various ways of adding elements, you can mix them up. Many people can mix these two things. Instead of appending just element, we can write something like this. If I write like this is the wrong execution of the adding element. So if I run this code, you see that everything is working fine, but it's not adding an element at the end of this list. It's adding another list inside this, which is the nested list. So this is not the right way of doing this. Because of the many ways, we can mix these ways. The best way to avoid such problems is try out each of these examples in interactive mode to make sure that you understand what they do. The most important thing here is that notice that here, this way of adding element is not giving any error. It's just adding nested list, which will cause problems in the future if we do any operation on this list. So let's continue the third problem. The third problem is whenever we do any operation on list, we need to take copy of this list because many methods modifying original list itself without keeping the original one. So for example, if we sort this list, we will see that without keeping the original, it's sorting the elements. So the list is sorted. It modified our initial list. So the best way to avoid such problems, every time we need to take copy of this list over here. We can do it like this. Original list equals to my list, something like this. So if I do like this, and let me print out our original list over here. So if I run our code now, you see that this is our original list, it stays as it is, and this is the sorted list. So here we can avoid this problem by keeping the copy of it. But in the case of sorting, there's another function which is keeping the original. We can use sorted function over here, which will not cause any problem to the original one. For example, if I do like this, sorted function, my list, and if I print out our list, you see that the original list is not changed. This is not touching the original list, it's just returning the sorted version of the list. So this means that to avoid such problems, we need to look at documentation very carefully to look for an alternatives. If we don't have any alternative, we need to keep the original list. So in this lecture, I tried to give you a brief explanation of drawbacks of lists and the ways to avoid them. So the best way to avoid any problem with the list is to read Python documentation very carefully. Hi there. In this video, we will look at what are the differences and similarities between arrays and Python lists. Let's start with similarities. The first similarity is that both data structures are mutable. It means that we can update elements of both data structures. So by using their index, we can update any element in the list or in the array. The second similarity is that both can be indexed and iterated through. This means that we can access their elements by using their index and we can iterate through them. In the previous lectures, I showed you how to iterate through lists and how to iterate through arrays. And the last similarity is that they can be both sliced. This means that by using slicing functionality, we can slice both lists and arrays. This functionality also was shown in previous lectures. If you go back to list lectures or array lectures, you will notice that we explain slicing in both cases. Let's see what are the differences. The main difference between these two data structures is the operation you can perform on them. Arrays are especially optimized for arithmetic computations, so if you are going to perform similar operations, you should consider using array instead of list. Let's imagine that we have an array like this, my array. I'll create an array using NumPy model. So I imported NumPy model over here. So here I'll create an array. Let's create an array of integers like this. It will start 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I will create another data structure which is list, my list. It's going to be also integers. So the difference is that if you want to perform any arithmetic operation on this list or array, on list we cannot perform it. On array we can perform it. Let's do like this. I'll print both cases. For array, if I divide it by 2, this will work. You see that each element of array is divided by 2 and written over here. So if you divide 1 by 2, it's 0.5, and then 2 divided by 2 is 1, and it continues like this. But if I do the same operation on list, you will see that we are receiving error. I'll copy it from here and put it here. Let's run our code. You see that we are receiving an error in this case. So which means that if you are going to do some computations on the data structure, it's better to use arrays. Arrays are optimized for this. So the second main difference is that in list, the elements data type can be different. But in array, all elements has to be same data type. Which means that, for example, if I put here extra element A, and here also A, if we print out both cases, let me print array as well, you will see that in case of array, these elements over here will be converted as string. So this will not be recognized as integer over here, which means that the data type must be the same. So let's run our code. You see that in case of array, we are printing array first, all elements is string. Even though we declared it as integer, it's converted as a string. But in case of list, these are integers, but this element at the end is string, which means that the data type can be different in case of list. But in case of array, the data type has to be same. So this is the main difference between them. So in this lecture, I tried to briefly give you what are the similarities and differences between array and list. Hi there. In this video, we will look at time and space complexities in Python list. In previous lectures, we have discussed about all operations over here, and we have discussed about time and space complexity of these operations. Here, I'm just giving you a big picture of this time and space complexities all together. So the first one is creating a list. Creating a list takes O1 time complexity because we are just creating a value and assigning everything all together. But the space complexity for this is On because it depends the number of elements that we are creating for a list. Then the next operation is inserting a value in a list. Inserting a value in a list can be O1 time complexity or On time complexity. Because if we insert an element at the end of list, then it takes O1 time complexity. Because in this case, we are not moving any element right. But if we insert an element in the beginning of list, then in this case, all elements have to move one step right, which means that if we have an element in the list, then we have to move n number of elements one step right. So this will take O(n) time complexity. The space complexity for inserting a value is O1 because we are just inserting one value. Then we are going to the next operation, which is traversing a given list. Traversing a given list is O(n) time complexity because here we are visiting each element of list. This means that if you have n elements in the list, then we have to traverse n steps through the list. So this will take O(n) time complexity. Here again, space complexity is O1 because an additional space is not required to do these steps. Then we are continuing to the next operation, which is accessing a given cell. As we said in arrays, accessing a given cell is very efficient in arrays. Here it's the same. Because based on index, we can identify the location of the cell in the memory and access it directly. Here, any iteration is not required. That's why the time complexity is O1. This is very advantageous part of lists and arrays. So the space complexity for this O1 because here again, an additional memory is not required to do this operation over here. Then we are continuing to the next operation. The next operation is searching a given value. So searching a given value in a list is O(n) time complexity because if we search a value in a list linearly, then we have to visit each element of list and compare the value that we are looking for. If the value is same, then we are returning. This means that in the worst case, we can traverse all elements in the list and find the element that we need. So here, the time complexity will be O(n). The space complexity one more time is O1 because here again, no additional memory is required. Then we come to deleting a value from the list. So if we are deleting the last element from the list, this will take O1 time complexity because in this case, no additional steps are required. But if we are deleting an element from the beginning of list, then in this case, it will take O(n) time complexity because if we delete first element from the list, then all elements on the right have to move one step left because here we cannot keep the first element's place empty. All elements have to be contiguous. That's why all elements have to move one step left. So this will take O(n) time complexity. And the space complexity one more time here is O1 because we are just deleting the element, no additional space is required. Now this is all for this lecture. Hopefully all operations are clear now and you know the time and space complexity of these operations in list. Now in the next section, we will look at top interview questions that are asked by big companies related to list and arrays. See you over there. In this section, we are going to create a project using array or Python list. So here, by using array or Python list, we are going to implement real-life project. So with this project, you will understand how can we use array or Python list in our real-life projects. Now in our project, we are going to insert daily temperatures to our program, and program should return the average of this temperature, and it needs to find the number of days above average temperature. So when we run our program, it's going to ask how many days temperature that we want. For example, in this case, if I put over here 2, then it's going to ask first day's temperature and second day's temperature. So after putting this, if I hit enter, it's going to ask day 1's high temperature. So if I enter, for example, 1 over here, then it's going to ask day 2's high temperature because here we have provided 2 days. So it's going to ask us 2 times. So here, if I put 2 and hit enter, the output will be like this. It's going to calculate the average of these two numbers, and it shows that 1 day is above the average because the second day's temperature is 2, which is above average. Now, by using array data structure, we are going to implement this small program over here. Now, before implementing, let's run our program in Python to see how this is working. So by the end of this section, your program will be like this. Now, when we run our program, the prompt will ask the number of days that we need to insert over here. So if I run our program, it says that how many days temperature that you want. So if I put over here 3, for example, and hit enter, it's going to ask day 1's high temperature. For example, if I put 10 over here and hit enter, it's going to ask day 2's high temperature. Then if I put 20 over here and hit enter, it's going to ask day 3's high temperature because here we have provided 3, that's why it's going to ask 3 times. Then in this case, if I put 15 over here and hit enter, you see that the average of these 3 number is 15, and it shows that 1 day is above the average temperature. So this means that here 1 day is above the average temperature, so average temperature is 15, so 1 day, day 2's temperature is 20, so this means that 1 day is above average over here. Now to create this project in Python, we are going to divide development into 2 steps. In the first step, we are going to calculate average. In the second step, we are going to find out the days that is above average. So let's get started. In this lecture, we are going to calculate average temperature. For calculating average temperature, we need to ask daily temperature from the user. Now, as you remember, when we run our program, the first prompt was how many days temperature that we are going to calculate. Now, in this case, to get information from the console, from the user, we are going to use input function of Python. So I'm going to create a variable number of days, num days. So this will be set to input, and as a prompt I'm going to put over here how many days temperature. So by doing so, we are going to ask the number of days from the user. So user will enter it from the console, so it's going to be saved to this number of days over here. Now here you need to take into account that whenever we enter anything from the console, it becomes as a string. So this means that we need to convert it to integer over here, because we are going to use this integer number to calculate the average temperature. Now the next thing that I'm going to do, I'm going to create a variable which will set to 0, because we are going to use this variable for some of the temperature of the days. Now then, I'm going to create a loop which will loop through the first day until the number of days that we have inserted over here. Then we are going to ask from user each day's temperature. So in this case, I'm going to create a loop like this for I in range. So range will start from 1 and number of days plus 1, because in case range function is not including the second parameter over here. So that's why by putting plus 1 over here, we are going to include number of days itself as well. Now inside this loop, I'm going to one more time ask from user each day's temperature. So I'm going to create a variable like this, next day. So it's going to set input function, and as a prompt, it's going to be like this, day plus stri. So ith day's temperature, so plus is going to be like this, as high temperature. So with this, we are asking the ith day's temperature from the user. Now in this case, one more time, we are going to convert this one to the integer, because in this case, it's going to come as a string from the console. Then we are going to calculate the sum of the temperatures over here, because to calculate the average temperature, we need to take the sum of all days temperature divided by number of days. So in this case, total will be set plus next day. Then after looping through all days over here, we are going to calculate average. Now average will be set to, I'm going to use round function to round it, so it's going to be total divided by number of days. So round will be by 2. Then at the end, I'm going to print out to the console average is equal to str average, because this will be the floating number. That's why I need to convert it to string to concatenate it with string value over here. Now let's save our code and run it to see how this is working. Now if I hit enter, you will see that it's asking the number of days temperature. So if I put, for example, 2 over here, and it's going to ask day 1's high temperature. So if I put 1 and hit enter, it's going to ask the second one, day 2's high temperature. Then if I put 2 over here and hit enter, you see that it's calculating average of these temperatures over here. Now you might be interested that we mentioned that we are going to use array data structure to write this program. But in this case, we have not used this. So in this case, it's possible to calculate average temperature without using array data structure over here. But here, the problem is how we are going to count how many days are above the average temperature. So we have calculated average temperature. We need to find out how many days temperature are above this average temperature. Now in this case, we cannot figure out this until we have gone through all of the data again. So this means that you need to make a second pass through the data of each day and figure out how many days are above the average. Now in this case, we can ask from a user one more time to enter the temperature of these days, but this will be very silly, because in professional programs, you can ask from a user a data only one time. You cannot ask the same data for the second time. So this is not going to be very professional, so this is going to be very silly. So how can we solve this problem over here? Now that's where arrays or Python list comes to handy. So by using arrays over here, we can solve this problem over here. So by using the array, we are going to save the user's input data for each day. Then we are going to calculate average temperature, and then by using this average temperature, we are going to loop through the array and finding the days which are greater than the average temperature. Now in the next lecture, we are going to implement array data structure to solve this problem over here. Now, as I mentioned in our previous lecture, to solve the problem of finding the number of the days that are above the average temperature, we need to use array data structure. Now in this case, you can use array data structure or Python list. So in this case, we don't have much differences. So for simplicity, I'm going to use Python list. So to do so, we are not going to change this part of the code, so it will remain same, because when we run our code, it's going to ask how many days temperature that we need. Then this variable also will stay the same, because we need this variable over here. Now after this variable, I'm going to create an empty list over here. So this is going to be temp equals empty list. Then I'm going to change this condition to start from 0, because array index starts from 0. So it will go until the number of days over here. Now when we are doing so, it will start from the 0th days. So we cannot print out to the console saying that day 0 is high temperature. So that's why I'm going to put over here plus 1. Then we are going to insert the temperature that we are getting from user to the list that we created over here. So what I'm going to do, temp.append, I'm going to use append function of list, will be next day. Now by appending it, the first day will be inserted at the index of 0 and the second day will be inserted at the index of 1. So by using this, we will understand that in the 0th index we have day 1's temperature, in the first index we have day 2's temperature, and it continues like this. Then the total will be calculated based on this list that we created over here. So temp list with the index of I, because it starts from 0 until the number of days. So here we will take the value that we have inserted to this temporary list over here, and then based on that we are going to calculate the total of this temperature. Now here, after calculating it, you see that we are not going to change this part because here we have the total number of the temperatures and number of days remains same, so this part remains same. Then we need to find the number of days which are greater than this average temperature. So now we have the average temperature and we have all days temperature saved in this temporary list over here. Then we are going to loop through this temporary list and finding out the number of days that are above average temperature. Now in this case, to do so, I'm going to create above variable and set it 0. Now initially we have 0 number of days that are greater than the average temperature. Then what I'm going to do, I will loop through this temporary list. So for I in temp, if I is greater than the average temperature, then in this case I'm going to increase this above variable by 1. So it's going to be by 1. So by doing so, if we have found a temperature that is greater than the average temperature, then in this case this will be increased by 1 and saying that this number of days are greater than the average temperature. Now then I'm going to print out to the console saying that str above, we are going to one more time convert this integer variable to str because we are going to concatenate it with the string over here. So we can put above days like this. So I'm going to put over here, it might be day or days, above average. Now with this we have completed our small program over here. Now let's see how this is working. So if I save this and run our code, now here you see that the first thing that it asks about the number of days temperature. Now if I put, for example, 3 over here, and for day 1 I'm going to put 20 and hit enter. For day 2 I'm going to put 30. For day 3 I'm going to put 50. Then hit enter. Now after doing so, you see that the average of these 3 temperature is 33.33 and the number of days that are above average is 1. In this case, day 3's temperature is above the 33.33, so that's why it's returning 1. Now let's run our code one more time for a different combination. For example, in this case, if I put 4 over here and hit enter, now in this case, for first day I'm going to put 20, then for the second day I'm going to put 21, then for the third day I'm going to put, for example, 50, then for the fourth day I'm going to put 60. Now if I hit enter, you see that the average temperature is 37.75 and number of days that are above the average temperature is 2. Now in this case, day 3's temperature and day 4's temperature are greater than the average temperature. Now this is all for this lecture. Now in this lecture we have used Python list data structure in a small program. So hopefully you have understood in which cases we can use array data structure or Python list data structure. So for these cases, both of them are useful. So for simplicity, I use Python list data structure. So you can use array data structure as well. So this is how you can use Python list in real projects. So see you in the next lecture. Hi there. In this section, we will look at interview questions related to arrays or lists. There are a lot of array questions which are at advanced level and related to topics that will be covered in the algorithm section of this course. That's why I have included here the ones which are related to topics that we covered till now. So let's get started with question 1. One of the most frequently asked questions on programming interview is to write a program to find the missing number in an array or list in a programming language, depending upon which language you use. Here, as you know, we are using Python. These kind of interview questions are not only asked in small startups, but also some of biggest technical companies like Google, Amazon, Facebook, and Microsoft, mostly when they visit the campus of reputed universities to hire graduates. So the question is to find the missing element in the array of 100 integers, which contains numbers between 1 and 10. So how can we solve the problem? Here, I want to give you a trick. The trick is we can find it by using sum of n series equation. From math, we know that we can calculate the sum of n series numbers by using this equation, which is n multiply n plus 1 divided 2. So this is the trick for this question. So here, I want you to pause the video and think if you can come up with your own answer. Pause the video now. Okay, as I mentioned, this can be easily solved by calculating the sum of series using n multiply n plus 1 divided by 2. This is one of the quickest and efficient way to solve this problem. So let's imagine that we have a list like this, in which element starts from 1 till 100. But here, one element is missing. So we need to find the missing element. As we said, we can find it by using sum of series equation. So here I will create a function, def find missing Our function will take two parameters. One parameter will be list, or we can create an array, it doesn't matter in this case. So the other parameter will be the number of elements in the list. So here we know that the number starts from 1 to 100, which means that we have 100 numbers over here. So I'll put a parameter n over here. By using the equation that we provided here, we can calculate the sum of n series, which is 100 in our case. So the sum one will be 100 multiply, which is n plus 1 will be 101, divided by 2. Then by using list sum function, we can calculate sum 2. So here I will use sum my list. This is the list that comes from the parameter. So by calculating these two sum, we can find the missing number. How can we find it? So we know that the sum of numbers from 1 to 100 is this value. So by taking this value and minus this value, we will get the missing number. So here I will print out sum 1 minus sum 2. So this will give the sum of the numbers between 1 and 100, and this is the sum of numbers that we have in the list. So if I subtract them, I will get the one which is missing. So let's save it and let's run our function for our list. Finding missing number, then parameter will be my list, and we know it's 100 numbers. Let's save it and let's run our code. We see that the number is 73. So this list starts from 1, goes to the 100. So if we go one by one, after 72 we see that 73 is missing. So which means that by using this function over here, we can find the missing number in the array. So here, by using sum of n series equation and sum function from list, we can find the missing number. So this is all for this question. Hopefully everything is clear now. So let's continue to the next question. Question number 2. Practicing coding problems are very important to do well in any programming interview. You should do your best on the data structures like an array, linked list, and a string to clear any programming interview. And believe me, you cannot do this just in 1 week or in 2 weeks. It's rather a long process of learning through coding, and that's where these small coding problems help. So here, we are going to look at another interesting question from array. So the question says that write a program to find all pairs of integers whose sum is equal to a given number. Now, for example, if the input array is like this, and the target number is 9, then in this case the output will be like this. So 6 plus 3 is equal to 9. So in this array we are looking for the pairs which sum is equal to 9. Now this is the same question as LeetCode question number 1, where it says to sum. Now here the problem statement says that given an array of integers and an integer target, return the indices of two numbers such that they add up to the target. Now here you see that they give 3 examples. So in the first example, the input like this and the target is 9. So you see that output is equal to 0 and 1. So here they are returning the indices of the elements. So in this case, in 0 index, we have 2. And in first index, we have 7. So if we sum up them, we are getting 9. Now it continues like this. Now this problem statement might sound very simple, but this was the exact question has appeared in a technical interview in one of the top tech companies like Amazon, Microsoft, Facebook, or Apple. Many of you might already have heard about this question, and some of you may have already know the solution to this problem. But it's not enough to know just the answer. In programming interview, many things matter apart from the correct solution. For example, the first thing interviewer looks at is whether a candidate can ask the right question or not. So before jumping straight to coding, spare a second or two, think about the problem and clear any doubt you might have. For example, you might ask following questions based on the upon problem that is given over here. So these are the valid questions for this problem over here. You might ask that, does array contain only positive or negative numbers? What if the same pair repeats twice? Should we print it every time? If the reverse of the pair is acceptable, so for example, can we print both 4 and 1 4 if the given sum is 5? And the next question might be, do we need to print only distinct pairs? Does 3, 3 is a valid pair for given sum of 6? And finally, you might ask, how big the array? Now, many programmers are afraid to ask questions. Instead, they like to assume it. But during code interview, it's always better to ask questions. First, it shows that you have not marked the answer, and second, it demonstrates that you have ability to think through a problem, which is very important quality of any professional programmer. Now let's switch to Python and create our method over there for this problem statement. Now here we are going to develop our method. Now here, before starting to develop our method, I want to mention that the pairs has to be distinct, which means that 2, 2 or 3, 3 is not a valid pair. Now the first thing that we are going to do, we are going to declare our method. So I'm going to declare a method like this, find pairs, and this method will take 2 parameters. The first parameter will be nums, which is the array in which we have the numbers, and the second parameter will be target. So this will be the target that we are looking for. Now here we are going to loop through this nums list twice. So the first loop will be like this. So for I in range len nums, so we are visiting all elements of this nums list. Then The second loop will be like this: for j in range. So it will start from I plus 1 because we need to check the next element. So it will continue until the length of nums. Then here, I'm going to check that if the sum of these two pairs is equal to the target, then we will print out the indices of these pairs. So if nums with the index of I plus nums with the index of j, which is the next number, equals to the target, then in this case, we are going to print out these indices, I and j. So I'm going to print out indices of the cells over here. So here, as you remember, we have mentioned that these pairs have to be distinct. Now, in this case, we have to skip if the pairs are equal. Now, to skip them, I'm going to put if condition like this. If nums I equals nums j, this means that these pairs are equal. Then in this case, we are just putting over here continue. Now, here I'm going to put elif. We will print out the indices of these pairs. Now on LeetCode question, they are not asking for the distinct pairs, but here we are asking for distinct pairs. So this means that if you are writing solution for LeetCode question 1, you just need to skip this part from here. Now let's check how this function works for a given list. So I'm going to create my list like this. So here, the first element will be 1, then the second 2, 3, then I'm going to put repetitive element to see how this is working. Now I'm going to call this method find pairs for this my list, and the target will be 6. Now let's run our code to see how this is working. Now here you see that we have an error, so we just need to put equal, not a sign. So if I run our code one more time, first it's printing out the 0 index and 6 index. So 0 index is 1 and the 6 index is 5. So if we sum up 1 and 5, it equals to 6. Then it's printing out 1 and 5 indices. So 1 index is 2, and in the 5 indices we have 4. So 2 plus 4 is equal to 6. Now in the third case, it's printing out third index. So third index is 2 also over here, and fifth index is 4. So if you sum up them, we are getting 6. So here you see that, so at the index of 2 and at the index of 4, we have 2, 3. And if you sum up them, we are getting 6. But in this case, you see that our method skipped them. So everything works the way that it should be. So hopefully you have understood this question. Now in the next lecture, we are going to continue to the next question. So see you in the next lecture. Question number 3. One of the common coding questions from coding interviews is how to test if an array contains a certain value or not. This is a simple question, but sometimes interview pressure makes candidates nervous. Since arrays in many programming languages do not have any inbuilt method for search, interviewers prefer to ask this question to see how a candidate deals with such situation. In many programming languages, there are many APIs or libraries to find elements in arrays. In Python also, if we use list, there's in operator, so by using in operator, we can find an element inside list easily. But here, we will use NumPy arrays, because many interviewers will surely ask you to write a method to search an element in the array using algorithms. As we explained in our previous lectures, we know how to search for an element inside an array. So here, we will implement linear search. It's very simple to implement. All you need to do is loop through array and check each value if this is the one or not. As you see, we have an array over here. We created this array using NumPy module. So here we will create a function which will take 2 parameters. The name of function will be find number. As the first parameter, it will take an array, and the second parameter will be the number that we are looking for. Then we'll create a loop in which we are starting to loop through this array. For I in, we will use range function over here. Length of array. So we know that range function starts from 0 till this element that we provide here. So the length function returns the number of elements in the array. So here, for each element, we will check if this is the element that we are looking for. So it will be if array index will be the I equals the number that we are looking for. Then we will print the index of this element, which is I. So if I save this and run this function for any given element, for example, find number in this array, this is our array, my array, and let's see if 13 exists. So let's see if 13 exists here or not. So let's run our code. You see that it prints out 12, so which means that 13 exists over here. So if you provide an element that does not exist in the list, it will not return anything. For example, if I put 21 over here and save and run it, you see that it's not returning anything. It means that the element does not exist in the list. We can put a case over here, else case, and show the message that the element does not exist. But in this case, I haven't done it. So this is all for this lecture. Hopefully everything is clear. You have understood how we are searching for an element inside an array. Question number 4. Here, we need to find maximum product of two integers in the array where all elements are positive. So this is another interesting question. So let's see how can we solve this. But before solving this, I want to give you a trick. See that if you can solve this. Here, we need to traverse through this array twice. So in every step, we are comparing the product of previous pairs with the current pair. If the product of current pair is bigger than the previous, we are taking the current value. So now I want you to pause the video, see if you can find solution to this question. Alright, hopefully you found the solution. If not, let's do it together. So here, I will create a function which will be the find maximum max product. Just do it product. This function will take as a parameter array. So we know that positive integer element starts from 0. That's why I will create a variable over here, max product, and assign a 0 to it. Then we can start to traverse through this array and find out the product of each pair. So for this, I will do like this. For I in range, then again len function. We explained this before, how this range and len function work. So here, inside this loop, I will write another loop, but this time it will not start from the first element, it will start from the second element. For this, I need to do like this. For j in range, to start from the second element, I need to write like this. I plus 1, then length will be same array. Then inside this loop, I need to calculate the product of pair and compare it with max product. If it is greater than max product, then I will assign it to max product. If it is less, I will not do anything. Then if array I multiply array j. So in the first run, I am multiplying 1 with 20, then 1 with 30, then 1 with 44, then 1 with 5, and each time I'm comparing this result of pairs with the previous one. If it is greater than the previous one, so I'm assigning the max product value to the current one. So it's like this. If it is greater than max product, then max product will be like this. So to know from which pairs this result comes, I just need to create a pairs value over here. So here I will assign these pairs over here. So to do so, I need to convert this one to string because I will concatenate them. str, then here plus signs, then I'll put comma between them. Then outside the loops, first I will print the pairs, then I will print the result, which is the max product. So our function is ready. What we are doing basically over here, we are just creating a variable and assigning to 0 because here the question asks that we need to take positive element. So the product of all positive elements are positive, so it will not be negative. That's why I took here 0. Then I'm starting to loop through the array. Then inside this loop, I created another loop, which will start from the second element to calculate the product of these pairs. So in the first run, it will be 1 multiplied with 20, 30, and 45, and so on. Then in the second run, it's going to be like this. 20 multiplied with 30, then 44, until it reaches the end. To calculate all pairs, we need to traverse all elements of this array. So the time complexity for this function will be O(n) squared time complexity. So then at the end, we are printing pairs and maximum product. So let's run our function to see how this is working. So I'll call our function here, taking this array and run it. So here we see that the maximum product of two integers in the array is 3306, which comes from the 57 multiplied with 58. If we look at this array, we see that the maximum element over here is 58 and one less is 57, which means that the product of these two numbers is the maximum number. So with this, we complete this question. That's it for this lecture. Hopefully everything is clear. So let's continue to the next question. Now this is another interesting question that asked in big tech companies interviews. The original question is, given two strings, write a method to decide if one is permutation of another. But here we are going to implement it for lists. So we are going to check that if two given two lists is the permutation of each other or not. First of all, let's identify what's permutation. So if two strings are permutation, they have the same characters but in different orders. For example, pick, keep rail layer. So these words over here are permutation of each other, because in this case we have same letters in both words, but these letters are located in different order. So we are going to implement this in list, and we are going to check that if two given lists is permutation of each other or not. So here the main tip is we are going to use sort function of list over here. Now I'm going to declare our method, permutation method, over here. So our method will take two parameters, so I'm going to name it permutation, and it's going to take two parameters, list1 and list2. Now the first thing that we are going to do over here is we are going to check that if the number of elements in these two lists over here are same or not. So if the length of these two lists are varying, so this means that they cannot be the permutation of each other. So this means that the first thing that I'm going to do, I'm going to check the length of these two lists over here. So if the length of these two lists over here is not equal, so this means that these lists are not permutation of each other. So we need to return false. So if condition will be like this: if length of first list, list1, is not equal to length of second list, which is list2, in this case we are going to return false. Otherwise, we are going to continue to implementation of our code over here. Now the first thing that I'm going to do over here, as I mentioned before, I'm going to use sort function of list to sort this list one by one. So first I'm going to sort list1, so I'm going to call sort. So when we are calling the sort method for this given list over here, it's going to modify this list itself, and it's going to change the elements of this list in sorting order. Then I'm going to do the same operation for the second list. So in this case we are going to sort the second list with the sort function also, and this one will sort this list 2 over here. Now then, after sorting it, we are going to check that if these lists are equal, then it means that they are permutation of each other. Otherwise, they are not permutation of each other. So if list1 is equal to list2, in this case we are going to return true, because these lists are permutation of each other. Otherwise, we are going to return false, because in this case they are not permutation of each other. So here in the else condition I'm going to put return false. Now with this, we have successfully implemented our permutation for this list over here. Now let's see how this is working. So here I'm going to create two lists over here to see that if they are permutation of each other or not. So list1 will be like this: list1 is equal to, for example, let's put 1, 2, 3, and list2 will be list2 1, 3, 2. Now in this case we can easily see that these two lists are permutation of each other. Now let's see if our method works the way that we want or not. So here I'm going to print out the output that comes from this permutation. So I'm going to run this permutation method for list1 and list2. Now if I run our code, you will see that in this case it returns true. So this means that we have implemented permutation successfully over here. Now you might be interested how this is working for string type of list over here. So for that I'm going to change it to, for example, so the type of string, so the elements will be A, C, B, for example, and in the second list I'm going to put C, A, B. In this case we can easily see that the places of elements are varying, so we can easily see that they are permutation of each other. Now let's run our code to see what is our method returning. So you see that our method returns true. So this means that these lists over here are permutation of each other. Now if I change, for example, one letter from here to D, in this case if I run our code, so I'm going to clear it from here and run our code, in this case you see that it returns false. So our permutation method works perfectly. Now with this we have come to the end of this lecture. Now in this lecture we have implemented a function which checks that if these two given lists are permutation of each other or not. So firstly we have checked the length of these functions over here. If the lengths are different, so this means that they are not in permutation of each other, so we are returning false. Otherwise we are sorting both of these lists and checking that if after sorting these lists are equal to each other, it means that they are permutation of each other. Otherwise we are returning false. This means that they are not permutation of each other. Then we have checked it for integer list and for string list over here. Now hopefully everything is clear about this lecture over here. So see you in the next lecture. Question number 7. Rotate matrix. Given an image represented by an nxn matrix, write a method to rotate the image by 90 degrees. This is a very difficult question. And this particular question has been asked in the interviews by companies like Google, Apple, Facebook, and Microsoft. Still, they are asking similar questions like this in their interviews. So how can we rotate this matrix over here? If we rotate this matrix 90 degrees, it will be like this. So here, as you see, the first column over here becomes first row after rotation. So the second column over here becomes second row after rotation. And the third column over here becomes third row after rotation. So how can we rotate this matrix 90 degrees? Let's see the steps visually that we are going to perform over here, then we will continue to code it. The simplest form of this algorithm to rotate this matrix over here 90 degrees will be like this. So here, first we will create a temp variable to store the top edge of this matrix over here. So this value is the top edge of this matrix, so we are creating temp variable over here and storing this in temp variable. Then we will move left edge element from over here to the place of top edge element. And this will continue like this. Then here, the bottom edge element will move to the place of left edge element. Then the right edge element will move to the place of bottom edge element. And here in temp, we have top edge element's value, which means that right edge element's place will be the top edge element. So after this operation, our matrix will look like this. So here, as you see, before we had 1 over here, but now it's here. And we had 7 over here, but now it's 9. 9 moved from here to here. And here we had before 9, now it's 3. 3 moved from here to here. Now the next step is we moved elements from outward layer. Now we need to move inward layer, which is over here. So in this case, 4 will move to the place of 2, and 8 will move place of 4, and 6 will move place of 8, and 2 will move place of 6. The final version of our matrix will be like this. So here, as you see, before this was our first column, now it is our first row. And this was our second column, now it's our second row. And this was our third column, now it's our third row. So by following these steps over here, we can rotate our matrix 90 degrees right. So let's see how this is working in Python code. Let's switch to Visual Studio Code and create a function there which will rotate our matrix from this version to this version. 90 degree rotation. So here, first of all, I will create two-dimensional array, which is represent the matrix that we had in our slides. So to create a two-dimensional array, I will import NumPy model. Then I will create my array like this in p.array. So to create two-dimensional array, we have to use double brackets over here. So 1, 2, 3, this is our first row. Then we create our second row here, which will be 4, 5, 6. Then we will add third row, which is 7, 8, 9. So if we print our array, we will see that this is the matrix that we created in our slides. So let's print out our array. Let's run our code. You see that this is the matrix that we have previously. So let's create a function in which we can rotate this matrix 90 degrees right. So I'll call our function name rotate matrix, which will take as a parameter matrix. In the beginning, I need to find out number of rows. So we know that from our two-dimensional arrays that if we take the length of matrix, then it will give us the number of rows. So I'll create value n over here. By using len function, I can find the number of rows over here. Then I'll create a loop which will start from 0, layer in, range. Here I will take the floor division of n, which will give us the number of layers in a matrix. So in this case we have 3 rows over here, which will be the range start from 0 to 1. So we have only 1 layer over here. So inside this loop I will create variable like this. So the first variable is value of layer over here, and the last variable will be total number minus layer minus 1. Then inside this layer loop, we will create another loop in which we will rotate the place of elements. We will start like this for I in range between first element and last element. So here, as we said in our algorithm, we will create temporary variable which will keep the value of top edge element. So here top element will be top equals matrix. This is the row number, will be layer. In the first run it will be 0. And the I also starts from 0, which means that here we will put I. So this is the value of top edge element. Then in the next step, as you remember, we said that we need to move left edge element to the top edge element. Let me comment over here. I'll put comment save top element. Then another comment will be here. Move left element to top. Which means that in this case, we will assign the value of top element, the value of left element. So we know from here that the value of top element like this. So we need to find out the value of left edge element. So in our case, left edge element is 7. So how can we reach here? You know that when we access elements of two-dimensional array, first we are writing row. So how can we reach this row? Now in this case, it's 0, 1, 2. So we don't know the format of two-dimensional array from upfront. So how can we reach this? We know that if we write here -1, then we will reach this element. Because accessing elements of array with -1, it goes to the last element in that row or column. So in this case, to put -1 here, I will put like this, -I -1. So in the first run, it will be 0, which means that here we will have -1. Then we know that this is the column 0. So for layer, in the first run, we have 0. I will put layer over here. Then the next step is we need to move bottom edge, bottom element to left. Then in this case, we know this value over here. This is the value of left edge element. We will just assign this value, the value over here, which is 9. So here we know that 9 is located in the last column and in the last row, which means that we can write it like this, matrix minus layer, again, -1 and -I -1. So in this case, for the first run, we will have matrix -1 over here and -1 over here, which means that the last column's last element and the last row's last element, which is 9 over here. Then the next step is we need to move right element to the bottom, which means that 3 has to move to the 9. So here we will write something like this, move right to bottom. So here we have this element over here. So we need to access the element over here, which is in the first row and the last column. So here we need to write like this, I, which will be 0 in the first run. Then to take last column, we are writing something like this, layer -1. Then at the end, we need to move 1 from here to here. As you remember, we saved our element in the top variable, so we can assign it to here straight away. So I will comment it like this, move top to right. So if I just copy this from here and put it here and assign top to it, and with this we are moving 1 from here to here. So this will happen in the first run. In the second run, we will move 4 from here to the place of 2, and 8 from here to the place of 4, and 6 from here to the place of 8, and 2 from here to the place of 6. Then at the end, after the loop, we will return the matrix. Return matrix. Because we are doing our modifications on original matrix. So if we run our code for this matrix over here, we will see the result. Let me print out it, print, and rotate matrix. We are calling it for the array that we created here, two-dimensional array. And save it. Let's run our code. You see that it returned the rotated matrix, but to make things clear, I just want to print out the original array over here, then see the rotation as well. Okay, we have our original array here, and this is the rotated array. So here we said that before, first column will be the first row. So first column here comes to the first row, and the second column from here comes to the next row, and the third column from here comes to the third row of the array. As you see, this is how the rotation works. So by writing this algorithm, we are able to rotate our two-dimensional array 90-degree right. So I know that it's a very difficult question. So if you have difficulties and you don't understand the logic that we are explaining over here, I want you to take the break and go for a walk or do something else in an open air, and come back and watch this lecture again. Then you will feel the difference and you will understand it much more better. So with this question, we come to the end of this section. Now in the next section, we will look at another built-in data structure of Python, which is a dictionary. See you there.